Hi everyone, welcome to the massive online open course. Uh, I am Dr. Ngamjahao Kipgen. I teach sociology in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. We'll be dealing with the course Environment and Development. So, in this lecture, I'll be more or less focusing on the thematic preliminaries which we will be engaging all throughout in this course. So first of all, let's have a glimpse of how the course is being structured, and then what the course will primarily looked at. So the course consists of theoretical applications and environmental knowledge pertaining to sustainable development. The course analyzes the reciprocal interaction between the physical environment, the social organization, and human behavior in the context of development. The course will introduce the students with an overview of environmental ethics, debates, and change to facilitate their understanding and analysis of the interrelationship between environment and development issues, and apply them to their own experience and work. And also this course will attempts to enhance the students knowledge of the nature and underlying causes of the most pressing environmental concerns, and to understand how these impact on the lives and livelihoods of the local communities like the indigenous people. And also this course will look at the possibilities for initiatives and community based natural resource management. So hopefully after the successful completion of the course, many of you, I'm sure, will be able to comprehend the complexity and various forms and dimensions of development and environment issues, and ground them or relate them with the current issues and as well as the real life experiences. So this course in fact will use the environmental sociological lens, and this course aims to locate the idea of development from the mainstream as well as alternative development trajectories. The theoretical and material linkages between environment and development processes and the multiple dimensions and sustainability and their conflicts and contradictions are or will be discussed in this course. The course also will examine social and environmental processes related to development and to current challenges and concerns. So most of the the Asian, African, and Latin American experiences have interrogated the linear model of westernized development. Indeed, the Western and non-Western models of development should not be treated as dichotomies. Rather, they depict different development strategies in different socio-economic and political cultural settings. Even Europe and North American continent have been trying to revisit their so-called development paradigms because of the anomalies that they are confronted with. Henceforth, we will in some sense in this course engage in interrogating the models of development vis-a-vis the environmental concerns. Developing countries such as India are also engaged upon trying to look at development from multiple perspectives and experiences. So this course will be an important, addition to our attempts to examine development from social, economic, cultural, religious, spiritual, traditional, environmental, and pluralistic perspective. So now these are some of the basic concepts or theoretical preliminaries which we will be delving upon in this course: environment and ecology, development, economic growth, and sustainable development, and also how society, nature, and cultures, the interlinkages and relationship. Now, to begin with, it is vital to differentiate between what environment and ecology is. Often, these two concepts or terms are being used interchangeably, and many of us in some sense have this notion that they are one and the same, but they are different. So what then is ecology? Ecology tries to understand the relationship of living organisms to one another and to their physical environment. And ecology also refers to the interrelations of human beings, flora and fauna, with elements of the natural and the physical environment, both biotic and non-biotic components. What then is environment? Environment again refers to the surroundings or the context within which humans, animals, plants, and other exist. So, in a sense, environment means anything that surrounds us. So, it can be living, biotic, and non-living abiotic things. So, it includes the physical, chemical, and other natural forces. So, in the environment, different interactions between animals, plants, soil, water, and other living and non-living things evolve upon. Now, we also agree that in some sense we live in close interactions with the natural environment that has shaped our cultural identity, value systems, and our economic well-being. Now, many of us generally put in isolation environment. However, environment, as I had pointed out, the natural environment which we are exposed to or which we inhabit shape our cultural identity in terms of our food habit, our living styles, and also our behavior. Therefore, the natural environment has a large impact on the human being. Now, at this point, it is also important for us to familiarize ourselves with what is development. Development is a process that creates growth, progress, positive change, or the addition of physical, economic, environmental, social, and demographic components. Okay. Now, how do we then, relate between the environment and development? Now, as we had pointed out, environment is defined as the entirety of the physical world consisting of the world's land masses, oceans, and atmosphere. So, development again is defined as the process of growth and change in human, social, political, and economic systems. So, one may, wonder and which of the two actually comes first. Is it the environment or development? So, in most or both of the developed and developing countries, there's always, an argument which stated that whether the economic development come first or the environmental conservations come first. So, the former follows the develop first and conservation later modeled, while the latter, that is the developing countries, follows conservation while development modeled. Now, one can in some sense stretch our minds a little further and then looked at that which of the two, that is the developed or the northern countries or the developing countries or the southern countries, give emphasis upon. So, depending on the priorities or the national policies and programs, mostly as we have witnessed since the colonial period and then in the post-colonial period, the developed countries in fact has given priorities to develop first and conservation later. But many environmentalists in the northern countries in some sense has developed this idea of wilderness thinking, trying to raise concerns about the environmental issues, and they have actually tried to bring in the very notion of how natures have to be conserved and nature has to be given a priority. Now, we in some sense encounter different kinds of environmental problems in surrounding areas. So, I have pointed out a few of these major environmental problems which have been encountered in the past few decades. The first one is biodiversity. So, biodiversity is the most complex and vital feature of our planet, and second is water. So, the pollutions of water is again a huge concern and for us and our environment. So, there are different factors responsible for these water pollutions. For example, the disposing of effluents, the industrial effluents to the sea or maybe the ocean or rivers is also one of the problems which we have witnessed in the past decades. And deforestation, rampant deforestations have also been witnessed as a result of timber logging, and for the industrial use, the raw materials which are being extracted from the forest actually has led to a kind of deforestation. And no doubt there has been a lot of policies or actions which are being taken upon for the afforestation programs. Again, pollution can be in different forms. It can be water pollutions, air pollutions, noise pollutions, and so on and so forth. Now, with the increasing, rapid pace of these urbanizations, you all must be aware that you might have seen, the increasing numbers of, colonies where households are being, set up at the same time, the increasing numbers of vehicles, and also the increasing pace of urbanization, as I had pointed out, and industrializations have resulted to pollutions of water, air, and so on and so forth. And finally, climate change is also one of the main concerns of recent times. So climate change has been always questioned, and some says climate change is not real, or maybe there is also a huge debate about climate change. Now, climate change is not something which can be, seen in isolation. Rather, climate change is being experienced by almost every species, not just by humans, but also by the non-human species. So there is an alarming situation where climate change has, impact the world or the universe like anything like never before. So all these problems will be, dealt in a much more detailed with, few case studies across the world, and also particularly in India, and we will be, taking these environmental concerns in a much more detailed in the later part of the course. Now, why is the environment important, or what is so significant about the environment? Now, environment, as you can see in the slides, plays an important role in the healthy living of human beings, and it also matters because it is the only home that humans, not just humans but also the non-humans, have, and it provides our, basic needs like air, food, and other necessities. Now, humanity's entire life support system depends on the well-being of all the environmental factors. Therefore, one can, witness and see the importance of, or the significance of the environment. So now the question is that can we live without this environment, right? Now, often you would, come across that human needs nature, and nature actually doesn't need human. So therefore, there is this sort of, growing, debate all around, even in our daily life, whether it's academic or maybe in the non-academic space. So now, is it possible for us to, exist or even live without this environment? Now, there are also, debates and possibilities of, life outside Earth, that is the universe, and in which you could see in some of the, films and science, which of course are, fictional, but in films like the Hollywood films like Avatar, and then the movie 2012, you could see the kind of, changes or the possibilities of life outside the Earth. But the million-dollar question remains that whether this can be practical, or is it really possible in our real life. Now, what is this context of environment? The environment, in association with learning and experience, again refers to the sum of outside differences, outside influences on the organism that is distinguished from the inherited potential that together influence the human behavior and development. We have, concepts like environmental determinism, environmental possibilism, how the environment in some sense influence the human behavior, lifestyles, well-being, so on and so forth. So we'll deal with all those debates and engage in a much more deeper detail in the later part of the course. Now, in relation to the natural world, which is currently seen to be fragile, that is, which are being threatened to the human actions and behavior, because the way in which we behave or the way we act out to the natural world in some sense has a reaction, right? Now, through the use of human technology and development, most importantly or specifically in the industrial revolutions, and with the increase of the human populations, we sort of pose a threat to the natural world, and therefore there is this growing concerns of the ecosystem fragility. Now, the animate and non-animate world, how do we difference and then make sense of between the two? The animate consists of plants and animals, which also includes the humans as well, and the inanimate like the objects, machines, and the physical world around us. Now, we would in some sense feel that they are different or two dichotomies, but there is a very intricate relationship between both the animate and the inanimate world. Now, one can also pause for a moment and then think that can we control the environment, because for quite some time we are pretty much boastful about our science and technology, which in some sense is the possibility of appropriating nature. At the same time, through science and technology there is always an answer, and we can derive to any kind of solution. Now, through science and technology, human in some sense has covered or have looked at nature, or our relationship with the natural world has changed dramatically by appropriating nature, or maybe by commodifying nature. We tend to not just dominate and control, but we are actually through science and technology exploit the natural world. Now, what are the increasing or concerns which we have witnessed across generations, or maybe more importantly in the past few decades? We have actually encountered environmental disasters like the tsunami and earthquakes, floods, industrial accidents, and all this in some sense highlight the animation of inanimate matter. Okay. Now, it is not that tsunamis, earthquakes, floods does not happen in earlier times, but the intensity or the impact is much more higher, and we are more vulnerable to these environmental disasters. So one have to really question and look into all this, that what are actually responsible for this. Why is it that we are more vulnerable to earthquake, for example, right? And people who are actually even inhabiting or living in the high seismic zone, for example the hilly terrain, thus in some sense go against the law of nature. For example, in terms of building houses or maybe various other development projects, for example, or maybe building dams in the seismic prone zone or maybe the seismic zone, right? So these are some of the issues which also confront us with. Now we do also have this artificial intelligence like the computers and robots. Now one can also look at the way in which humans actually encounter with machines and vis-a-vis the environment. Now one can also engage and look at that, do humans make machines or machines makes us human? Now can machine think and feel, or can machines overpower humans? Okay, and can we also redesign human species like we design machines? So these are something which you all must be familiar with, and you might have seen movies like the Terminator series, Alien, iRobot, Star Wars, and Avatar, which I had mentioned earlier. Now these are something which we as humans through the tools of science and technology have engaged upon, that how do we actually engage upon redesigning the human species like we designed machines. And of course there are some developed countries where the robot is actually fulfilling the purposes of many of the duties that we humans generally do. But is that the way out or the possibilities? Now the context of development which we are actually trying to engage upon in this course concern with the perception, the representation and connection between the human society and environment in stages of the human and societal development. Okay. Now as we all know that society has evolved through different historical stages, that is our stages of evolutions from the first form of society, the primitive or food gathering society, and we move on to the horticultural society, pastoral society, and the feudal society, and the industrial society. So one can actually see the way in which the material development and appropriation of nature is being witnessed across these successive stages of society. One can also agree with me that the more society developed, that is from the simple to a much more complex and a much more complex society, have actually witnessed the way in which how the nature is being appropriated, right? So our relations with nature in some sense has changed across different successive society. Okay. Now the relations in some sense between the human and nature in the food gathering or the primitive society, it's much more harmonious in some sense, right? So therefore there is less harm or effect which are being committed on the nature, right? So therefore one can actually contextualize society in this perspective. Now how do we look at growth and development, and then how do one actually contextualize or make sense of what economic growth or development is. Now, economic growth is being defined by the GDP and wealth. Now, what is GDP? GDP is the gross domestic product, and the GDP is total value of output of goods and services produced within an economy in a given period of time. Now, wealth again defines how developed a country is in terms of the assets or wealth which they owned. Now, economic and human development, for example, the Human Development Index, not merely reducing, for example, poverty, and GDP in that sense also includes other indicators such as literacy and education, life expectancy and health, social welfare, human rights, state of the environment, the development of human capacities. So, economic growth again is the increase in value of goods and services produced by an economy over a period of time, as I had pointed out. So, therefore, it is conventionally measured as the percent of the rate of increase in the real GDP. So, growth is usually calculated in real terms, that is inflation adjusted terms, in order to net out the profit, net out the effect of inflation on the price on the goods and services produced. So, literally from the economic point of view, or in economics, economic growth typically refers to the growth of potential output, that is production of full employment, which is caused by an aggregate demand or observed output. Now, GDP is also used as a measure of living standard, that is how GDP has a key attraction of the internationally agreed standards of calculations. Now, one of the important issues which we have to engage upon or deliberate upon in this course is that what is sustainable development, because now increasingly, whether we normally looked upon issues of biodiversity conservation, so on and so forth, and often what clicks into our mind is this idea of sustainability. Now, what is sustainable development? Now, if you look at the definitions, that is the Brundtland report, in the report entitled Our Common Future, which was given by the World Commission on Environment Development way back in 1987, talks about that sustainability or sustainable development can be defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, in some sense, this particular report argued that the development process which we engage upon should not be aimed at not simply meeting the needs of the present generations, but it should also aim and cater to not to compromise the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So, in some sense, what we are actually doing is we are actually borrowing from the future generations, right? So, therefore, development or any forms of development should not necessarily lead to any environmental degradations and destructions. Okay. Now, again, if we further looked at the sustainable development, one can questions what is the purpose of sustainable development. Now, the sustainable development goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for world. Okay, when we say for world, it consists of all successive generations, and at the same time maybe including the non-human being species. So the purpose of sustainable goals again address the global challenges which we face, which includes poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradations, peace and justice. Now, the more the world move on, or the country or any kind of country move on to supposedly a developed society, we could see an increasing inequality in terms of access to resources, right? And similarly, there is also growing concerns about the environmental degradations. The 5 P's which are being underlined in sustainable developments are people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership. So these are the 5 P's which are being outlined in the sustainable development. Now, there are also 4 main types of sustainability. The human, number 1 human, number 2 social, number 3 economic, and number 4 environmental, right? So therefore, one can actually look at the way in which how sustainable development is processed, and how do we actually move on to a much more sustainable process. So this is the definition which you can see in the slide, the definitions of sustainable development, which is outlined by the World Commission on Environment and Development. And these definitions, or the sustainable development, was endorsed in 1992 at the Art Summit in Rio. Now, at this point of time, it is also important for us to familiarize ourselves with the principles of sustainable development. Sustainable development emphasizes on 2 basic needs. Firstly, it emphasizes upon the need for a socio-economic development, and secondly, it also espouses the need of limitations imposed on the environment's capability to cope with the present and future requirements. So way back in 1999, in May, the UK's Sustainable Development Strategy was published and defined sustainable development in terms of 4 objectives. Social progress, which recognizes the needs of everyone. And over here, we should keep in mind that there is also an underlying objective to this, that is to eradicate poverty and hunger, which in some sense aims to guarantee healthy life, guaranteeing a healthy life. So the second is the effective protection of the environment, and the third is the prudent use of the natural resources. That is, in some sense, it aims to universalize access to basic services such as water, sanitation, and sustainable energy. Now, we often talk about that air, water are, the free gift of nature. Now, at times there is also a possibility that how water or maybe air is being commodified, right? Because as you can also see that a safe drinking water is a big challenge which we have encountered and witnessed. And then today, as you can see, safe drinking water in some sense is being commoditized to a large extent. Now, the fourth objective of sustainable development is maintenance of high and stable levels of economic growth and employment. So therefore, one of the underlying aims of this is to support the generations of employment opportunities through inclusive education and decent work, right? Now, for your information, I am just giving a piecemeal, fact about how inequality or injustice is being, witnessed across the world. At the moment, presuming that 1/5 of the population, right, just a small chunk of populations actually receives an appropriate 82.7% of the total world income, whereas the poorest 1/5 receives only 1.4% of the world incomes. So you could actually see the kind of differences and poles apart in terms of access to not just the resources or wealth of the nations or the world over. That is most importantly the income. So therefore, one can possibly think of how we can looked at the kind of injustice or inequality not just in terms of the environment per se, but in terms of how the economic growth and development is actually taking place. Now, as I had pointed out that many of the environmental problems which we have encountered has actually put the natural world in a much more vulnerable state, and in the environmental terms we use ecosystem fragility. Now, what is ecosystem fragility? As a result of a large-scale destruction of the forest during the historical process of colonization and most importantly the post-industrialization period, there is a conversion of the original forest vegetation type, and that has depleted the germplasm of forest trees, and which has also led to a change all around, which we normally perceive as a global change, involving such as the climate change, biological invasion, land use cover changes, and also biodiversity depletion. So these are some of the growing concerns which we have encountered as a result of the environmental problems which we encounter. Now, out of this arises the concern for the environment or environmentalism. So many of these areas of thought are part of a set of loosely integrated ideas, and then which of course considered an alternative social or environmental paradigm, which are rooted in ecological concerns and principles. So we will deliberate upon the few of these environmentalisms or environmental ethics all throughout the course, and more importantly, like social ecology, radical ecology, deep ecology, so on and so forth. Now, there is also a growing, dichotomy or divisions between the North and South. Now, when we talk about the North, we are, drawing a boundary where the northern countries are supposedly, the more advanced and developed countries, which have reached a certain point in terms of, the economic growth and development, whereas the South, that is the southern countries, if you look at the globe, you could actually see the North and the South. So if you draw a line there, most of the most of the developing or underdeveloped countries constitute in this category, that is the South. So therefore, there is these divisions of the North and South, and you can also actually see the American and Indian. So why is this division again important for us to engage upon or to relate between environment and development, right? Now, most of the developed countries, that is northern countries, have actually exploited or used or utilized natural resource to the possible extent. They have appropriated as a result of taking advantage of science and technology. They have, through industrialization process, they have reached a point where nature has been exploited to the possible extent. But interestingly, in the developing and the underdeveloped countries, which are categorized as the third world countries, one can see that because of their social, cultural background, they have, or maybe religion, they have that history of being close to nature. So when we look at the debate of society, nature and culture, it is interesting to see, and we can actually observe that many of the indigenous communities who are actually being categorized as the third world countries have looked at or engaged upon the way in which how nature is being very much part and parcel of their social and cultural milieu. Okay. Now, out of this, one can actually look at one of the main objective of the course is also to look at the possibilities of alternative development, the need for alternatives, right? And what is the alternative, right? Because we somehow feel that what we have actually witnessed today is maybe science and technology also does not have the answer. They have failed in some sense. So therefore, there is an increasing or urging needs for alternative development or possibilities which we have to overcome about this. So one of the need for alternatives, that is an appropriate technology, and many of us is familiar with Gandhi, but Gandhi is always associated with the national movement during the colonial period and the Indian national movement, so on and so forth. But it is also interesting to see that
Gandhi's idea of self-reliance or Hind Swaraj is pretty much applicable in terms of the way we make sense or understand or contextualize environment and development. So we will also be dealing with this in the later part of our course, and one can also see the relationship between religion, science and sustainable development, because religion is a set of beliefs which of course shape our minds or maybe our relationship towards nature. Now we'll be looking at few religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and also indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge system, and see how it can be critically looked upon at the way in which they relate themselves to the environment, and our point or our motive is to relate them to sustainable development. So therefore, religion plays again a very important role in terms of the environment. Now, science and technology has been for quite some time accepted as a means to or a solutions to every kinds of problems which is confronted by the human being. Now, development in some sense means improving the human conditions in all aspects, not only economic but also social, socio-political and environment. Now, what does sustainable development attempts or actually means? Sustainable development means doing so by means and to end points that are consistent with maintaining the improved conditions indefinitely. So therefore, sustainable well-being entails pursuing a sustainable development to achieve well-being where it is absent, and also to make those others experience a continued state of well-being where the means are not sustainable. So now one can also possibly question that how can science and technology positively improve well-being? Now we agree that the advances in science help us in not only understanding shortfall dangers but also aid development of technology. So therefore, advances in technology help meet the basic needs, reduce production costs and reduce consumption of resources and environmental impact, and also help in development of new or improved product services. So when we talk about technology, because even among the traditional or the indigenous peoples, they also have their modes of forms of technology. So technology has to be critically looked at in terms of which particular technology is much more environmental friendly, and then which is much more sustainable, and which caters to the well-being of the people. So one needs also to look at the technology of different stages or in different social and cultural background. Now, is there a possibility of going back for a future, right? Is it possible for us to in the industrial or post-industrial society, can we afford to go back to the primitive or the first form of society in order to confront or maybe trying to bring sustainable development? And of course, we have science and technology, but the only way or the way to bring or move out of this is to build a secure world, is to change not just the world and our way of relating and thinking about the natural world in order to develop a sustainable world, not just for ourselves but for our children and the successive generations. So therefore, one of the increasing urging need for us is to think globally and not just locally. So therefore, many grassroots activities are promoting sustainable development. The civil society organizations, NGOs, or maybe the environmental organizations and bodies are concerned about promoting sustainable development, and this fundamentally emphasize and re-emphasize what was traditional and indigenous. So in this process, in this course, we also will try to address and looked upon or make sense and understand the way in which the traditional or the indigenous societies, how well they manage their natural resources. So in other words, the natural resource management of the the traditional and the indigenous societies also will be looked at. So as I had pointed out, one of the Gandhi's Hind Swaraj is something which we have to look upon, and the relevance of Gandhi in some sense is again an alternative. And then surprisingly, it is also interesting to see that the American Associations for the Advancement of Science, the president of AAS quote Mahatma Gandhi in his speech, where he says that the world provides enough to satisfy everyone's need, but not enough to satisfy everyone's greed. So in some sense, this particular lines addressed the growing concerns as well as a possible solution to the environmental problems which we encounter. So we will be dealing in a much more in-depth detailed about Gandhi as well as other alternatives which are being provided by some of the philosophers like Arne Naess and others with their deep ecology, social ecology, so on and so forth. Now, what is interesting about Gandhi's underlying statement over here is that we, as a human, being in this universe or in these natural surroundings, the natural surroundings or the world in some sense has enough resources, that is, we can actually satisfy our basic needs, but the problem comes when the need is being replaced by greed, that is, accumulation of wealth, appropriation of nature, or commodifying nature. So our outlook, our behavior changes the moment this greed comes into play. That is, we tend to see things from a utilitarian perspective and not simply based on our subsistence or well-being. So therefore, there is a growing concern about in social ecology. We would actually look at how the way in which human dominate nature is also partly because the dominations or this hierarchy or inequality is very much inherent in the human society, in our social structure. So this very behavior or our mentality of dominating or hierarchying between human beings is played out in terms of the way we looked at nature, the way we perceive nature, the way we relate ourselves to nature. So therefore, it is very interesting to see that how Gandhi has actually outlined that because Gandhi was also actually being very much anti Western model of industrializations. So he often give emphasis on self-reliance, that is to limit our needs and also engage or use or optimize what we have in our natural surroundings. So that's the end of the introductory class. So I have partly delved upon some of the or familiarize you all with how we go about with the course, and then the thematic preliminaries or the concepts which we will be engaging upon in this course, that is environment and development. And as I had outlined, this course is also about closely engaging upon or interrogating the models of development, because development today, as we have witnessed, have bring in or usher in different kinds of problems such as displacement, dispossession, and also we have new terminologies which are being evolved over a period of time, like ecological refugees, climate refugees, so on and so forth. So the environmental problems which we have encountered or confronted has put not just the ecosystem in a fragile state, but also the humans themselves or the humans ourselves are in a fragile positions and in a very alarming states. So with this thought and aim in our mind, we will try to look into different kinds of the environmentalism, the environmental movement, and also ecofeminism and deep ecology, social ecology, and the relevance of Gandhi, and then the models of development through the practice of like buildings of dams, mining, and various others, and also looked at how climate change is being perceived and witnessed or understood in different levels by the human society. So therefore, this course environment and development will engage or deliberate upon all these issues which confront us. So we are not actually attempting to bring a solution, but try and see the alternatives, right? The possibility of bringing or confronting these particular issues. So I'll stop here. Thank you.